This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. You know, I've been critical of Kevin Stefanski over the last 2-3 weeks here on this channel, but I got to give Kevin credit where credit is due. And look, as far as the timeline and the circumstances that it took in order to get to a different quarterback, I don't like how long it took. I don't love how we had to arrive here. But when we did arrive at this point with a new quarterback, we looked great. And he gets credit for that. There have been a lot of conspiracies over the last week since Kevin has announced that he wouldn't be the play caller anymore. And I think these conspiracies all stem from a portion of the fan base that, for whatever reason, never wants to give Kevin Stefanski credit for anything. And if you are somebody who's willing to give Kevin Stefanski any kind of praise, they will act like you never have said anything critical of Kevin, right? They're like, oh, you're refusing to be critical of Kevin. But meanwhile, like, everything that they've ever said about Kevin Stefanski has been like defamatory or just straight up like wrong, or just painted in a way that's so overtly negative that it's not even close to the reality of what's going on. And that has kind of been the tone around some of this stuff with Kevin not being the play caller. Some people are trying to say, oh, the Browns offense looked like this, not because it wasn't Deshaun Watson throwing the football anymore, but simply because Kevin wasn't the play caller anymore. Look, there's a lot of evidence to the contrary that the play caller change had much to do with this, more so than the obvious change that happened, which is Deshaun Watson is not playing quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. But even if it was the case that Ken Dorsey was a superior play caller to Kevin Stefanski, right? Even if we live in that warped reality, that's not really true, because if you've watched my film breakdowns, you have seen me point out that the intermediate pass game has been open and available for the Browns quarterback pretty much the whole season, and we haven't taken it. Now, when I first pointed this out and said, hey, Deshaun has to throw with anticipation, people acted like that was an impossible thing to expect a quarterback to do. And I want to be clear when I say people. I'm not talking about the vast majority of people. I'm talking about the people who wanted this to be Kevin's fault and did not want this to be Deshaun's fault or something like that, right? The people who really took a side and didn't listen to reasoning during this whole crisis and really we're fighting a war for whatever reason about something that's straight up objective. But yeah, I pointed this out after the Dallas game. I pointed this out after the New York game. I certainly pointed it out after the Washington game, that there are opportunities here to be made in this offense. There have been chunk plays available. Same thing was said when I was critiquing DTR, talking about why I don't think that there's much there for DTR, at least for this season, because of his inability to attack those intermediate parts of the field, and also, the lack of confidence that he has at time in his own ability. It kind of is concerning to me, right? But so the evidence has been here for a while that Kevin Stefanski and the play calling weren't the main issue going on with the team. Like, yeah, there were a couple play calls here and there that weren't great. I'm pretty sure the same exact thing is going to happen with Ken Dorsey, where he's going to call a play that you don't love, right? I thought people already had their criticisms about how the first half ended, and it's Ken Dorsey's fault that they turned the ball over. People are always going to have criticisms about play calling, and that's my take on it, right? I think it was a good idea to switch the play caller to Ken Dorsey for other reasons other than like the overall offensive philosophy. I thought it was a good idea to switch to Ken Dorsey simply because Ken Dorsey likes to throw deep, and so does Jameis. So they're going to have a better feel for each other. And also, I thought it was a good idea to switch to Ken Dorsey because, well, you were having issues with pre-snap stuff, right? Seeing things, diagnosing things pre-snap, and also pre-snap penalties. And I thought the Browns were significantly better at that now that they're not wondering what the play call is going to be, you actually have time to be able to do a hard count, or to be able to identify the mic and all of that stuff, or identify the nickel, however you identify the blitz side of a formation. For if you're the quarterback, right, you have time to do that because the play call is in. And I thought that was really nice to have there. And if that's the decision Kevin made for the reasons he made it, then I agree with it. I think it was a good choice here. So Kevin gets credit for putting his ego aside and deciding that he doesn't need to call plays given the circumstances that the team is in. See, that's called putting the team first. That's a good trait for a leader to have. It would be a bad trait if he decided to just stand on ground and call the plays, even though it was making the team worse. So, he gets credit for putting it aside and doing what made sense, given that Jameis was going to be the starter. I think Kevin Stefanski's a really good coach, and I think he really proved it this week. Just think about the chaos that was preparing for this game versus this opponent this week. I mean, fans and players were at odds all week on Twitter and through press conference clips. People were arguing about what Shelby Harris said and what did Greg Newsome say and what this player said and who said what about this and that. And it was a whole topic that went on much longer than it really needed to. But that was kind of a disaster going on this week. You also have players preparing to play with a new quarterback, given that the guy that they started went down for the season, and not just a guy that they started, a guy who is supposed to be a franchise quarterback. You also have this team kind of coping with a loss that they haven't taken in a very long time, which is home to the Cincinnati Bengals. And then you also have them preparing to play a world beater in the Baltimore Ravens, while the world kind of perceives you as one of the worst teams in football. And they came out this week, and it's like none of that shit happened. Like, this team looked as focused as they've ever been. They looked as together as they've ever been. And they, in turn, they got the fans back on their side. And this felt like the 2023 Browns. This felt like a team that can overcome. This felt like a team that went through a rough week, but came out of it a bit stronger. See, a lesser coach would have crumbled under those circumstances. And we have seen lesser coaches crumble under those circumstances. We've seen coaches start to point fingers at each other in circumstances like that. We've seen locker rooms devolve, and then that leads to Josina Anderson being parked outside of the Browns locker room for like 3 weeks as the locker room devolves into madness. We have seen dysfunction be created off less toxic situations than the one that happened on Sunday. But the truth is that they had every excuse to get this situation or have this situation become toxic. Some of us in the fan base outright expected this situation to get toxic, to start hearing the leaks from within the locker room, to hear that they're losing faith in this guy or that guy, to get all of the toxic shit out, right? Like, that's what we kind of expected. But instead, this locker room stayed together. You didn't hear any leaks, and they came out focused, ready to play the Baltimore Ravens like a team that was 6-1, not 1-6 going into that game. And they played hard and they beat the Baltimore Ravens. You get credit for that as a coach. That is what makes him a coach of the year. Could you imagine Hugh Jackson trying to handle this team in that circumstance, or Mike Pettin, or Freddie Kitchens, or insert whatever, Romeo Cornell? Like, that's not something that a bad coach can handle. It's something a good coach handles. And with Kevin Stefanski, to give him credit, he's handled situations like this almost every year that he's been a head coach, and he's handled it well. So I know there were a lot of people saying that Kevin Stefanski's 2 Coach of the Year awards are fake, right? He doesn't really deserve the 2 Coach of the Year awards, but this week, right now, he just proved it. He has those accolades for a reason. He can steady the ship at high tide. He's the captain. He's always been the captain. He's willing to make decisions. He doesn't care about how it looks. Look, switching to Ken Dorsey as a play caller, a lot of people felt like that was a bad look for Kevin Stefanski. He did not care. He felt like it was the right thing to do. He did it. Now, I wish he would have came to that conclusion with the quarterback position a little bit earlier. I think that would have helped avoid a lot of the tide that was created for him. But you get credit for digging yourself out of a hole that you might have created for yourself. Like, we just do. We give credit for that. Because, yeah, we understand human beings aren't perfect. Human beings aren't going to make the best decision all the time. But if you're somebody who's capable of getting yourself out of a tricky situation, even if you created it, well, then now we see you as more competent, because we understand you're going to make a mistake, but it's how you respond to it that matters. Again, I don't like how long it took to get here, and I certainly don't love the path that we had to take to get here. But you got to give credit, because once we got here, the result was phenomenal. The Browns went from a team everybody was expecting to have a top 3 overall pick, maybe even a number 1 overall pick, to a team that just beat the team that everybody is projecting to come out the AFC. A team that has a 3-time MVP at quarterback, and they started Jameis Winston, and you can argue Jameis Winston outplayed Lamar Jackson. Not because Lamar had an especially bad game, just because Jameis had a better one. Kevin deserves some credit for this. Look, I've been critical of him and how long he took to get here. But if you get here and it looks this good, got to give you credit. So, Kevin Stefanski, giving you some credit here. Don't love that you got in this situation. Don't love how we got here. But again, I like to judge people on how they respond to mistakes and how they try to fix problems that they might have made going forward. And if I'm looking at Kevin through that lens, okay, don't love that you got here, but love that you fixed it. Y'all have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.